Kicked out. Because my sister got pregnant, now they need my help. Growing up, it was clear who my mother's favorite was. My younger sister, Sarah, was the golden child. She could do no wrong, and I often felt like I was only there to make her shine brighter. My mother doted on her endlessly, making excuses whenever she made a mistake and bailing her out of every little problem. Meanwhile, I was encouraged to be independent, to handle my problems on my own, and to not ask for much. Despite it all, I loved my family and did my best to stay close to them, hoping that one day my efforts would be acknowledged. But everything changed one cold winter afternoon when Sarah walked through my door with trembling hands and red eyes. "I'm pregnant," she whispered, looking more frightened than I'd ever seen her. Her boyfriend had walked out on her the second he found out, leaving her alone with the responsibilities she wasn't ready for. I consoled her the best I could and encouraged her to tell our mother, certain that she'd need all the family support she could get. I went over with Sarah to break the news, expecting shock and worry from my mother. But I should have known better. My mother, instead of addressing Sarah's situation rationally, turned to me with an unexpected decision. "She needs space to focus on the baby," she said, her tone calm but firm. "We'll need your room." My heart sank. "You're asking me to leave?" I asked, barely able to process her words. She looked at me as if I should have seen it coming. "You're independent. You can handle yourself, but Sarah needs support right now. It's only temporary." Temporary felt hollow. Sarah, who'd made every mistake under the sun, was being handed my place in the family home, while I, the responsible one, was being thrown out to fend for myself. The reality was clear. In my mother's eyes, my sister's needs would always outweigh mine. Forced to move out. With nowhere else to go, I quickly found a small studio apartment in a cheaper part of town. I scrambled to cover the rent with my part-time job, taking on extra shifts to make ends meet. Days blurred into exhausting weeks, and I barely heard from my family. In those months, I had no choice but to lean on myself. Every hurt, every sleepless night, every tear shed only made me more determined. I pushed myself to finish my degree, juggling school, work, and loneliness. My independence, once forced upon me, became my greatest strength. Eventually, I landed a decent job, one with benefits and a steady income, and for the first time, I felt like my life was truly in my own hands. And with every little victory, I felt a growing distance from the family who'd abandoned me. I found new friends who became my support system, a chosen family who celebrated my wins and helped me through the hard days. I stopped looking back, stopped waiting for calls that never came. My success was mine alone. Years later, a call for help. It had been 3 years since I'd seen or heard from my mother and sister when, out of the blue, I received a call from my mother. The tone in her voice was strained, hesitant, almost as if she didn't want to be calling me. I braced myself, unsure of what to expect. "Your sister's... she's struggling," my mother began, her voice barely a whisper. Apparently, life hadn't gone as planned for Sarah. She had struggled to find steady work, and raising her child alone had been more difficult than she'd anticipated. Now, my mother's resources had dried up, and the two of them were on the verge of losing their home. My mother's voice wavered. "I know we didn't part on the best terms, but Sarah and your niece need help. I thought, maybe you could..." Her words hung in the air. The irony was unmistakable. After casting me aside when I needed them most, they were now reaching out, hoping I'd step in to fix the mess they'd made. I had every reason to say no, to hang up and close that chapter of my life for good. But the image of my young niece, caught in the middle of this, made me pause. Taking a deep breath, I agreed to meet with them, but I made it clear, any help would be on my terms. A new beginning, I met with Sarah the next day. She looked worn, far from the bright-eyed, carefree sister I remembered. She apologized, tears in her eyes, admitting that she'd been wrong, that she'd taken me for granted. She spoke of the struggles she faced as a single mother, of how she'd realized, too late, the value of family. For a moment, I felt a surge of bitterness. but I knew that holding on to that would only weigh me down. Instead, I offered her a job at my company, an entry-level position, but one that came with benefits and a chance to learn. If you work hard, you can make it, I told her. But this is your responsibility now, no one else's. It was a tough transition for both of us. Sarah had a lot to learn about independence, and I had to learn to let go of the past. My mother apologized in her own quiet way, though I knew our relationship would never be the same. But with time, we found a balance. Sarah worked hard, finally understanding the strength it took to stand on her own. And as she grew, so did our bond. We were no longer the children shaped by our mother's favoritism, but two adults trying to make sense of the lives we'd built. Moving forward. Looking back, I realized that being forced out of my family's home was the best thing that could have happened to me. It broke me down, but it also made me stronger than I ever thought I could be. I had learned to stand alone, to find my worth outside the approval of others, and in the end, that was worth more than anything my family could have given me. My mother, too, learned a hard lesson about the consequences of favoritism and the damage it could do to a family. And while we never fully mended the wounds of the past, there was a quiet understanding between us, a recognition of the paths we had each taken and the strength it took to return from them. Family, I realized, isn't just about blood or the people we grew up with. It's about the people who stand by us, who support us through thick and thin. I had found that family in the unlikeliest of places, in my own strength and in the friends who had become like family to me. Now, when I think of my family, I feel a deep sense of peace. I had become someone they could rely on, not because I owed it to them, but because I had chosen to rise above the pain. And that, I knew, was the truest form of strength I could ever ask for. This story follows a young woman who has always been overshadowed by her younger sister, Sarah, in her mother's eyes. When Sarah becomes pregnant unexpectedly, their mother makes a life-altering decision to kick the main character out of the family home to make room for her sister and the baby. Forced to fend for herself, she faces hardship, but ultimately becomes stronger, building a successful career and a chosen family of supportive friends. Years later, her struggling family reaches out, needing her help after Sarah's life spirals out of control. Despite the past hurt, she offers her sister a job and finds a way to reconnect. This journey explores themes of resilience, forgiveness, and the transformative power of independence, showing how true family extends beyond blood ties.